This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
The Deepwater Horizon oil spill that started 80-some days ago may be plugged, but plugging the hole in Florida's economy created by the spill may be even more complicated. Good evening, I'm Lloyd Patterson. This is CTC, Connecting the Community. Governor Crist has called a special session of the legislature to grapple with the oil drilling issue. Earlier this week, some of Florida's most powerful lawmakers met at WSRE TV's Gene and Paul Amos Performance Studio. Senator Don Gates' Select Committee on Florida's Economy heard firsthand about the impact of the oil flow.
The year that we thought would be a possible recovery year has turned into the year that the locusts have eaten.
We'll hear more testimony in just a moment, but now our guests, and both of them were at this workshop at the Gene and Paul Amos. Cliff Long, Government Affairs Director for the Emerald Coast Association of Realtors in Fort Walton Beach. Welcome to the program. And next to him, Greg Brown has been the Santa Rosa County Property Appraiser for the last 10 years and has some 30 years in the appraisal industry. And welcome both of you to the program.
Thank you.
That was a tough 4 hours to hear about all the ways that oil has hurt, is hurting, and will continue to hurt the state of Florida. Cliff, what surprised you the most out of that?
What surprised me the most was the sheer depth and the expanse with which the oil has hurt. The scope of my job primarily focuses on real estate and real estate issues, but as I began to look and listen to the environmental damage, as I began to look at the damage that was done from so many different sectors, I was in shock and awe personally. And I don't know the way out, but I know that we have to do something.
And of course, Greg Brown, you're a property appraiser in Santa Rosa County, right, and that job is really intricately involved in this oil spill, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I serve on the Governor's work group for economic assessment impact, and I had heard a lot of this testimony, and this was the Senate Select Committee that we were listening to the other day that's headed by Senator Gates, but incoming Senate President Mike Herodopoulos was there, so we were hearing a lot of things, but it was more localized, dealing with our residents in Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa counties of the impact that the oil spill is having on us. And as you appropriately talked about earlier, the tentacles just keep going out of the people that this is having an impact on. And from a property standpoint, myself and Chris Jones and Pete Smith are looking at issues of how to help the taxpayers, especially in the short term and in the long term. We have sent letters to the governor and the speaker and the Senate president on some of the issues that we would like for them to look at in special session in the short term, and then if not in the long term in special session in the regular session coming up next year.
But you feel like something is just going to have to be done. Otherwise, people are going to be paying property taxes on property that's valued for far more than it's really worth.
Well, what's about to happen is we're about to send out value notices in the next couple of weeks that reflect a January 1st date of assessment. And so that will not reflect any diminution in value due to the oil spill. And so we're concerned about that the citizens will see this value and there's nothing in there to show any decline due to the oil spill. And so that is a concern, because the way we assess that property as of January 1st is looking at sales that occurred in 2009. So without some type of legislative action, there's nothing that the property appraisers can do to provide any relief to the taxpayer.
Cliff, do the realtors support this action?
Well, we definitely support some activity from the property appraisers. Because to complement what he said, our realtors are now experiencing situations whereby whether or not we perceive that there's been a loss in value of the property, the lenders certainly do. And people who are buying and traditionally purchased property in Florida, they perceive a loss in value. And so if something is not done to address this, then not only will the property owners be in a situation to where they're paying taxes on property that's devalued in the public's eye, but the actual budgets and other things of that nature are going to be affected. And I'm certain that Greg will touch on some of that later on today.
Yeah. If you just joined us, you're watching Connecting the Community, CTC. I'm Lloyd Patterson, and our guests this evening are Cliff Long from the Realtors Association of the Emerald Coast, and based out of Fort Walton Beach, and of course Greg Brown, the property appraiser of Santa Rosa. They were both at this hearing at the Gene and Paul Amos Performance Studio the other day, where we heard about how the oil flow out of the BP mess is just taking a powerful punch that it's delivering to Northwest Florida. Dr. Rick Harper, the economist from UWF's Haas Center, was one of those who testified.
We can see, as the property appraisers will tell you, that there are diminished asset values that we need to look at. And as the appraisers use their valuation tools of looking at either sales of comparable properties or looking at replacement costs or looking at the income producing potential of those properties, they will tell you that the income producing potential of properties in Northwest Florida has been damaged by the spill. People choose to live in Florida and are willing to accept a slightly lower wage to do so. Economists call that a compensating differential. We value the quality of life that we find in Northwest Florida, and under the Oil Protection Act, recreational values are clearly a category of damage.
Dr. Rick Harper from UWF talking before the Gates Committee the other day here at WSRE's Gene and Paul Amos Center about the impact of the oil. Dr. Gates, of course, his testimony was a lot longer than that, but he really brought it home, didn't he?
Yes, he did. What Dr. Harper was basically talking about is people are willing to take a lesser income just to enjoy the amenities that we enjoy along the Gulf Coast. And I believe that's what he was talking about, and those costs are recoverable from an economic standpoint to the counties. And I think he's right on. Dr. Harper from UWF is a very bright man and is well-known economist in the area, and I value his opinion. He went with me to the Economic Assessment Impact Work Group in Tallahassee and spoke there, and I think that UWF has a lot to offer with Dr. Harper from the Haas Center in helping us forge ahead with assessing the economic impact in our region.
And Dr. Harper mentioned that until this flow is completely stopped, we're months away really from getting our arms around how much damage has actually been done, Cliff.
Absolutely right on that, Lloyd. Just as Greg put it, we also reached out to Dr. Harper at our association, and he's been a friend to realtors, not just the Emerald Coast, but all realtors across the Panhandle, and he agreed to work with us, just as he agreed to work with Senator Gates on that day. And one of the things that he's helping us to do is to establish a baseline for sales, a baseline so that we can accurately put a hand around what's been lost, so that we can understand the total impact as you're putting it in. So he's definitely a friend to realtors, but so much damage has been done that if we don't have an economist like Dr. Harper who can take our facts and figures and put it into a package that can be understood by the Senate, by the legislature, we won't ever be able to understand and realize the relief that we actually need.
Will everybody who's lost a dollar because of the BP oil spill, will they be able to get that dollar back from BP, do you think?
No.
I wouldn't know how, because the tentacles reach so far out to really assess all the claims. We're just trying to get our hands around the income producing properties and how that will relate and to residential properties that are impacted along our coast, but also inland, because what happens is if there is a decline in the taxable value in the counties, the only compensating measure that the commission and the schools have is to raise the millage rate. And so what we're trying to do is to prevent the increase in the millage rate onto all the citizens of our counties to compensate for the loss in value along the coast or even inland due to the impacts of the oil spill. So we're working very diligently with our legislators. I'm working with the governor's work group to get that point across, that we get some kind of legislation to compensate for that, to bill BP to at least as far as taxes go, that we make our citizens whole. When you break it down per individual, I don't know how we'll be able to get down to per individual for dollar, but on taxes, I'm working very hard to make sure that we're made whole.
There are some jobs, are real estate people. Are they going to be able to be compensated for what they lose, for instance?
Lloyd, I would not think so. There's just so many different scenarios and caveats to it. Our property managers are having to revamp their contracts. They're having to do things to try to attract vacationers back to Florida that is literally taking dollars out of their pockets. There's a perception that the beaches are overflowing with oil and that Florida is not what it used to be. I'm so glad that they got the well capped, because that perception is out there, and because of that, our property managers are losing value. And then there's the perceived value of the coastal home, not just the property owners, but the coastal homeowners, home sellers, and home buyers. We're not capable of attracting that top dollar right now that we used to on those homes. People are calling and they're wanting to negotiate the price down before they ever come down and take a look at the property. And so they're operating under the assumption that the value has been damaged. Well, that eventually turns into dollars. Those dollars eventually turn into taxes, and those taxes eventually are those dollars that flow back into our county and city coffers. So just from that aspect alone, but what about the person whose business feeds off of the tourism or the real estate industry? What about the person, the property managers themselves, not the people who are doing the renting, but the people who are physically managing those properties, who, because there aren't any bodies, physical bodies in those properties, they don't actually have the physical work that can be done, and therefore they can't feed their family. How do they make their claim? What do they make their claim on? Is it based on lost income? Is it based on what we did last year? There's just so many different types of liabilities that just can't be spoken for, Lloyd.
Greg?
And just to add, we were in the meeting the other day when the Vice President of the Board of Realtors, state of Florida, threw out an interesting number that this year the amount of pending closings that are in the hopper right now are 50% less than they were last year.
Yes.
And so
and last year wasn't that great a year.
That's exactly right. And what we're looking at right now, the statistics that I have, is that the foreclosures and the short sales through June the 30th are 3% more than they were last year. And it's somewhere in the 18 to 20% range of foreclosed sales that are going on in our market in short sales. And after a fashion, that just transcends in dropping the property values, yes, which has been exacerbated by the oil spill.
We're talking about the oil spill and the impact on the Florida economy. There was a workshop held at the Gene and Paul Amos Performance Studio here at WSRE earlier this week, and brought in a bunch of experts testifying before this Senate panel about what should be done, what can the state of Florida do to help people who have been hurt by the oil spill. Whether there's actually oil on their property doesn't really matter. If everybody thinks there's oil and they're not coming and doing business with you, well, then you've been hurt. Steve Riggs with Carr, Riggs, Ingram in Fort Walton, a big CPA firm, was one of those who really brought the damage home. Listen to what he had to say.
It's depressing up here. I want to tell you what, everybody's excited about 2010, January, February, March, April is getting better. And then, man, this thing happened. But I want to tell you what, it's just depressing because, you know, people that, you know, you're having to fire employees that might have worked for them for 20 years. You know, they're just having to lay people off. And then you're like, okay, maybe I could struggle through the summer. But, man, come October, November, December, it's, you know, you generally have your cash piled up on Labor Day. And then you've got the seeds set so you can ride over the winter. But man, it's not happening right now, and it's just it's tough for anybody that's self-employed, that owns a business and employs a lot of people. It's brutal out there right now.
Brutal out there now, says Steve Riggs, CPA with Carr Riggs, and they are doing some work with this committee. And one of the things that they are trying to do is come up with what they call a defensible case that they can make, because when people go and present a claim, they have to be able to say, they can't just pull a number out of their ear. They've got to come up with an exact, precise number.
And that's exactly right. And these are things that we're trying to do in looking at small businesses or rental properties, is look at the income stream. And Cliff can talk to this, but normally in the spring and summer we have what we call the spring bounce, which is the increase in the number of sales that we have, because the largest number of sales that we see that occur in the market is in the spring and the summer. And in the autumn and winter, the number of sales just kind of trickle off and tail off before we go to, it's cyclical. And so what we're seeing right now, with the comment I made earlier, that we have 50% less than last year, just shows that this summer is just going to be dismal. And looking forward ahead to the autumn and winter months will even be worse.
As Steve Riggs said, these businesses, the beach businesses especially, have their cash piled up by the end of summer that holds them over. Well, this year, they're not going to have that money piled up. So what's going to happen in October, November? Cliff?
Well, in October and November, we're going to have, unfortunately, Lloyd, a demographic of people out there who are either going to be able to get a loan to stay in business, or they're going to be out of business. Steve put it very eloquently. It's depressing. It's very depressing. I have brokers who contact us at the association. I had a gentleman out in South Walton County who last year was having a phenomenal year. And let me just touch on that. For the first 2 quarters of this year, real estate and home sales, new home sales, were actually climbing. The Senate and the House helped us out with the tax credit, and home sales were on the rebound in Northwest Florida, but in Florida in general. And January, February, March, April, May, we had a steady incline in home sales every month. And then June, as we started to find out about the oil spill and the impacts, and the oil started to come ashore, it literally fell off. There's no claims process out there that's compensating realtors for lost sales and lost commissions outside of the property managers. We're in a situation whereby I said that one gentleman contacted me and said, Cliff, listen, I've got liability, I've got overhead. I did several $100,000 in commissions on last year, out of which I used to pay my overhead and my staff. This year, because of what's happening in the last 2 months, I've made $14,000, and I'm going to be out of business. What can you do for me? Because there's no claims process in place with BP that actually compensates realtors, there was nothing that I could tell them right now. And we're in the negotiation stage. But where do you start, Lloyd, when, as of today, today we received good news, but up until today, it had not been capped yet. So you couldn't, there was no baseline for where we were going to go and how we're going to pay the claims. It was a sad situation.
There was an official with British Petroleum who spoke to the panel, and it was actually someone who was in the decision pipeline, as I understand it, where before they were getting people who were more in the public relations field, which is fine, but this was someone who could really answer questions. Were you satisfied with what you heard about how BP is handling claims and getting people paid?
Well, that satisfied is a two-edged sword. I was satisfied with their attitude. BP has been very gracious in their attitude, their willingness to address the issue. That person was Mary Schaefer Malicki with BP, and there's never been a time when they have not taken our phone calls. And in fact, if you contact them today, I think she said their wait time was about 6 seconds. But 6 seconds into oblivion doesn't help us in our situation. And that's because as of right now, they're not paying the claims. We're definitely in favor of the way that they've greeted us and the gestures and the things of that nature, but we can't be happy until we're compensated from a realtor perspective.
Yeah. The thing I was most interested in it was that Mr. Feinberg was receptive to include governmental claims.
Hold on a second. Feinberg being the federal official appointed to handle the $20 billion BP claims fund.
That's right. Okay. That he would be amenable to receiving claims from government for reimbursement. And that was, to me, a very positive sign. I, like Cliff, is that the BP rep seemed to be a little more knowledgeable. There was a lot of questions she couldn't answer that she was going to get back to the committee, that Senator Gates pointedly asked her to get back to the committee on as a request from that committee, that she agreed to. So we'll see what that response is and how that works out through the ongoing process. And if I could just back up a minute, Lloyd, sure. just to say, to reiterate what I talked about in there's nothing the property appraisers can do except through legislative action and special session. And on my website, which is www.srcpa.org, you can go on there and click on the oil spill, and there's the 5 people that have the decision-making power at the state, and email them that we needed to have something done during the special session to deal with property tax relief.
So you're saying that Santa Rosa property owners don't come to my door demanding that I lower these property rates because you don't have the authority to do that?
Well, I don't have the authority. They'll get a very sympathetic ear, and they'll get support from me that I support what they're talking about. But as far as the law goes, there's nothing that we'll be able to do other than refer back to that January 1 valuation date using 2009 sales. If they want me to help them, they need to help me help them by getting the legislature to enact some legislation to help with the tax rebates or some type tax relief.
Now, property tax is a concern for everybody, and they can sure make a good case why the property should be valued for less. But as we heard the other day, there are so many people who are really in a pickle right now. They need the money yesterday that they have lost, where your stuff is going to sort of, the appraiser stuff is going to sort of trickle in as sort of a slow motion thing. These other people, there are thousands of people, aren't there, Cliff, in this area who are really needing the dough now? Yeah,
there are people who can't put a label, Lloyd, on exactly how and where they lost their money, but they just know that the bottom line is I don't have the dollars coming in right now, and it's because our income, our industry, everything we do in Northwest Florida is tourism driven. I think that was brought up in that meeting on that day. It's tourism driven. And so if the tourism industry as a whole is affected, everyone is affected. Our schools will suffer from this because of devaluation and because of the lack of dollars that are coming in to the county. Every byproduct of this society is going to suffer. I'm not saying that BP is on the hook and should compensate every person, every business, but I am saying that we do need a session. We do need what Greg's talking about. Something does have to happen in the legislative realm to help the citizens out, because BP won't be able to compensate everybody. We touched on that a second ago. And but most of all, we need to make sure that everyone who needs to file a claim does file a claim. And I'd like to encourage, whether you're a realtor, if you're working in the real estate realm, please document your losses. Please get your paperwork together and file a claim with BP, because one thing we do know, and one thing that has come out, is they're not going to take cash and walk to the courthouse steps and start passing it out.
No, no.
If you don't have a claim with them, you will not be receiving compensation.
I would think people would be lined up, ready to call in instantly, but I'm surprised to hear that they expect that a lot of people just will not go through the hassle of trying to file a claim.
I've heard that, Lloyd, and but what we're trying to do from a governmental standpoint is we are trying to help. We're trying to do everything that we can at the local level to work with our state leaders to get BP to either fund refunds, because when you talk about it trickle in, come November, tax bills are going to be on the street. So these people that are needing money now, not only for electricity and the other things, on top of that is coming, their taxes are going to come due. And so it just keeps piling on with no relief in sight. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we don't pass those taxes on to the rest of our citizens, and we also are trying to make sure that we don't hurt our schools and our government with a loss in revenue that we believe is coming.
Okay. One other area of concern, of course, that everybody is fearful of is the impact on wildlife. And Representative Matt Gaetz, the senator's son, who was just recently elected to office, pointed out one of the problems that he's hearing about in taking care of oily birds.
First, someone has to call a hotline, which is maintained by one contractor. Then a capture team has to be employed, which is yet another contractor. The capture team can only wait with the bird until contractor number 3, the transport team, arrives, who then transports the bird to Panama City, where contractor 4, the stabilization team, stabilizes the bird. Then we go back to the transport team, where the bird has to drive from Panama City to Pensacola, where we encounter yet another contractor, the wash team, who washes the bird, only to go back to the transport team, back to Panama City, where the bird is rehabilitated and released.
So he said that there are 5 contractors that are involved in taking care of oiled birds. And I don't know if that's just because the bureaucracy has a hard time responding quickly to things like this, and it automatically piles up in layers of complication. What do you think about how the government has responded to this?
Well, I don't know if that falls under the unified command and because we've never had to respond to an incident like this. If it were a hurricane, we know what to do. If it's a wildfire, we know what to do. If it's a tornado, we know what to do. This oil spill is the first time that we've had so many environmental issues come up and tax issues. This thing is so widespread, it's just unbelievable. So everybody's trying to do their part, which infuses a lot of layers that gets on, and until we go through a little bit longer process to start streamlining, I think we're going to run into that. But it's very frustrating for us, for the realtors, for people in general to hit all these different layers when everybody's trying to do something, but it just mounds up and it becomes very frustrating.
Cliff?
In the 2008 legislative session, the Florida Realtors and other groups got together and we passed a bill that would encourage ecotourism in Florida. Ecotourism is different than regular tourism, which is beach driven. Ecotourism is people who are interested in the ecosystem. They like to bird watch, they like to do things out in the nature trails. And when you start to consider our resources like Blackwater, North Santa Rosa County, when you start to consider the hunting and the fishing that happens in the Century and the Jay and the Okaloosa areas, these things are going to be adversely impacted because we have an equal number of people who come here for those types of things. When you start to consider the wildlife that's going to be affected, the habitat, ecotourism, and those dollars that are going to be lost, it's going to be tremendous. We will lose just as many dollars for that, I would estimate, as we would for the beach, because everyone doesn't come here just for the beach. There's so many other amenities to Northwest Florida that draw people, and ecotourism is one of them. And when you affect the wildlife like that, that's one of the things that'll be detrimental.
Well, fellas, I appreciate your appearing on our program. It's been very interesting, and nobody knows. We're not going to know for maybe years how much this all costs Florida. But I appreciate you being here, Cliff Long, and of course, Greg Brown, the property appraiser. Thank you for watching another CTC. I'm Lloyd Patterson. Thank you for watching WSRE PBS for the Gulf Coast.